Hi, and welcome to my podcast number 5. I'm Glenn Cooper. I'm a business broker in Denver. I've been helping people buy, sell, and value small businesses for nearly 50 years. I've also written the only book on the subject called Glenn Cooper on Business Brokerage. In this podcast, I'm going to tell you all of my secrets just as I do in my book and in my podcasts. Today in this episode, I'm going to tell you what you have probably learned about selling a business is likely to be all wrong for selling your business, and especially wrong for negotiations. All the great sales teachers of the last several decades teach the ABCs of selling. Simply put, ABC stands for always be closing, meaning that you, as the salesperson, they say, should always take control of any encounter with the buyer. ABC means that you should maintain pressure on that buyer by continually asking for the sale. That's what's meant by always be closing. That's a really stupid idea, especially when selling your business. We're now beyond that, I think. Buyers won't tolerate it as they once did. It doesn't work anymore. In negotiations, too, those high-pressure tactics actually drive away your best buyer prospects. What works is to start with active listening. To do that, you actually give up control and just listen and observe. That openness on your part is then seen as reasonableness. Being reasonable, pleasantly so, surprises buyers. It gives you a chance to achieve a win-win with a business buyer. Today, people want to sell themselves on the things that they choose to buy. The wisest path, let them do it. That's the winning strategy. I call this the listen, teach, and lead method. Listen to what they're asking or telling you. Teach what you know using the yes and method. And then finally, lead them to follow your vision. Starting with listening works. It can often position you as a teacher and leader, not a salesperson. You have a chance to become a trusted consultant, a helpful coach. People today are bombarded with sales messages. Their level of resistance to sales is reaching epic heights. What people yearn for is personal contact by a real person. They also recognize a helpful coach who has answers and also who cares, especially in the context of buying a business and most especially in the context of negotiating price and terms. When you're selling your business, even though buyers recognize that you do want to get paid what it's really worth, they'll respond in a positive way to that helpful coach role that I know you can play. As the owner or broker of the business they want to buy, they'll also accept your leadership. And some of you fully understand the yes and method that I referred to. When someone is negotiating with you and makes a point that you may disagree with, the best response does not start with yes, but. It starts with yes and. Yes, I agree with you on the other point you made, perhaps. And that's exactly why I'm hoping that you'll agree with me on this point. Yes and takes the conversation forward. Yes, but stops it. But before I show you how and why that works, let me remind you that it's all covered in my book. The book is called Glenn Cooper on Business Brokerage, as I said. It's new. It's on Amazon. It's a big book, 125,000 words, 36 chapters, 4-color printing, 8.5 by 11, weighs 2 pounds. It's a training book for business brokers, but it's a good read for anybody selling a business. Chapter 5 is the introduction to Part 5, which is chapters 25 to 30, which appear later in the book. If you're listening to this podcast, you'll understand it completely if you just buy a copy of my book. I can't possibly cover in a 15 to 20-minute podcast what I can cover in my book. Let me also mention that my personal contact information is in my book, so feel free to email or call me. And if you do call or email, I will respond personally. If you tell me who you are and give me a way to respond, I'll be there for you. Listening, teaching, and leading is the new mantra of a skilled salesperson, at least in the world of selling a small business. I'm not sure that the old mantra of always be closing will ever go away, though. I'm surprised that people are still falling for it, but they are. Just not most folks buying businesses. Business buyers seem to be a pretty intelligent group. Most books about sales in my lifetime, even the ones from as recently as just 20 years ago, like those from Zig Ziglar, Tom Hopkins, Jeffrey Gitomer, Those books tell us that we should always be closing. And if you see other people's podcasts and even most ads everywhere today, they're still trying to use that high pressure sales tactic. My objection to it, however, is not just that it won't work in this business. My objection is also that it's morally wrong. Watching salespeople talking urgently in a loud voice with machine gun rapidity and distorting all the facts along the way, from politicians to ads for professional gambling, drugs and supplements, automobiles, insurance, and everything else, is something that really is quite unethical in my view. I guess it works for politicians who tell us what they think we want to hear. It works for people who are trying to sell us gambling. It seems to work for those promising wonderful results from drugs and supplements or the latest luxury cars or easy to get life insurance for the elderly. But it's wrong because it works to deceive the buyers in nearly all those cases. Most politicians really can't fix the problems we face. Gambling is never good for us. Hair loss and brain supplements almost never work. Buying that brand new car is really not a very good idea for most of us. And when grandma buys life insurance online, she usually loses that documentation, so the insurance company never has to pay. Using those techniques when selling your business is both morally wrong and a disaster if the person you're selling to is not the right fit. It's rarely as simple as a cash deal where you get to be the clear winner even if the business fails. And so when selling your business, it really does have to be a win-win usually. You deserve a fair price, of course, but your business will often fail if you have deceived the buyer. At the very least, what you sell the buyer has to work for the sake of the business. So if you do adopt my listen, teach, and lead model, you might then ask me, what should you teach your buyer and where should you lead them to maximize the value of your business? Well, every business is different. Every buyer is different. So how to answer that question is kind of difficult, but let me try anyway. In my chapter 5 in my book, I discuss my training in consultative sales with Sandler Sales Institute. I also discuss how personality type and generational differences are important in studying buyers. But I'm going to take a different tack here in this podcast 5 than I did in chapter 5 of my book. In my book, this was an introductory chapter for personality types and generational differences, but I can cover those later, as I also do in my book. So right now, I think I'll change the order to discuss value drivers instead. Value drivers is also later in my book. Value drivers, those business characteristics that create value in the eyes of buyers and lenders alike, are elements that you can weave into your answers to buyer questions when you're discussing their wants and needs. You can be a consultant and a coach for your buyer. Teach your buyer about maximizing the value drivers that are relevant to the business you're selling. I'm going to give you a list of just those elements that affect the value of your business, which you need to emphasize as you craft the elevator pitch that I suggested in the last podcast. You know, in the last podcast, I suggested that you need to build your business description by sharing the purpose, promise, offer, and difference of your business. I would still follow this outline, but as you do, use these categories that I'm now going to give you. A business that's valuable has 8 different value drivers, at least, that I will discuss more at length in a later podcast, and that I actually list again in chapter 33 of my book. When buyers evaluate your business, they look at these value drivers. So do lenders. And what I'm suggesting is that you remember what your buyer is telling you that they want in a business and what skills and talents they want to exercise as they answer the 4 key questions you should ask them that I covered in podcast 3. Looking at your buyer and assessing what that buyer wants, craft your elevator pitch that I suggested in podcast 4 to explain your business purpose, promise, and difference as those things relate to these value drivers. The value drivers are attractive and interesting and worthwhile work, strong market position, right location for this buyer, growth potential and quality of earnings, operational stability independent of the seller, effective and efficient systems, good books, records, and technology, and finally, reasonable price and terms. Attractive, interesting, and worthwhile work is what all buyers want. They want to make use of their skills and make a difference in the world and make a good living for their family. Strong market position is what their lenders want to see before they'll make them a loan. So be open about who the competitors are. Right location for this buyer, given what the buyer told you in answer to the questions you asked about why he chose your business, and especially if your buyer is moving to your community. Growth potential and quality of earnings is what the lender wants this buyer to have in order to qualify for a loan. Operational stability independent of the seller. It's important not to paint the current owner as some sort of hero. From the buyer's perspective, it's better to think that he's more talented than the current seller. Same with what the lender wants to see. Effective and efficient systems, which includes sales and marketing systems. Everyone wants to see strength in that area in particular. Good books, records, and technology. To qualify for a loan, both the buyer and the lender need to see that the financial records and technologies used by the business are current and completely up to date. Finally, reasonable price and terms is what both the buyer and the lender wants to see. A forecast for the new owner's first year of operation must show that the debt coverage ratio is at least 1.25, even for a qualified buyer. And if you are listening and don't know what that is, you really do need my book. If you want to follow along, I'm covering what's in my book, Glenn Cooper on Business Brokerage, available on Amazon. I've altered this podcast 5 to include other material from my book other than what's in chapter 5, but you'll figure it out. My listen, teach, and lead sales process is best followed by reviewing your 4 answered questions that your buyer gave you from the 7-step screening process that we put them through in podcast 3, formulating and pricing what you're going to say in your elevator pitch that I suggested you practiced in podcast 4, and now including how you discuss the 8 value drivers just mentioned in this podcast. In the next podcast, we're finally going to talk about how to understand, present, and defend your business value. In fact, that's the title of my book's chapter 6. I hope you didn't get lost in my first 5 podcasts, but I needed to lay that foundation. Thanks so much for listening so far. See you next time.